welcome to another episode of the Hidden World of Women podcast, brought to you by Women's Health and Wellbeing Services. My name is Melanie Robson and I'm your host again today. And today I have another wonderful guest. Her name is Vicky, and she's along today to talk about her journey to becoming a mother using egg donors to help with her conception, because I understand she went through obviously some difficulties with fertility. So I'm very excited to have you on today and hear about that process. Welcome, Vicky.
Thank you, Melanie.
Hello. So I guess I'll just hand over to you now and ask you to introduce yourself and maybe start where you'd like to start in terms of that whole, it sounds like a bit of a tough journey and how that came about for you, if that would be okay.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.
No worries.
So I'm a Perth mum, and I'm 46 years of age. At 32, I was diagnosed with premature ovarian failure. Some people refer to it as early menopause, but generally early menopause is for women that are over the age of 40. So prior to that age and periods ceasing, it's referred to as premature ovarian failure.
Right. And you didn't know prior to trying to fall pregnant? You had no...
No.
Yep.
I was on the pill for many years. So as we know, the pill disguises a lot of things that are going on in our body, and our periods are actually our dashboard, our warning system of what's going on with our body. So my body wasn't able to tell me that anything was going wrong because I was disguising it by using the pill.
Yep.
So when and prior to going on the pill, I had beautiful regular periods with no pain and 28 days on the dot and all those things, and I miss my beautiful periods.
That's so lovely to hear. Often you hear women say, oh my God, the worst thing ever, and for some women they absolutely are, but that's really refreshing.
Absolutely. But I think that women don't realise that when they're not relatively pleasant, that's their body telling you something is not right and it needs to be investigated. So I think it's really, really important for women to take note of that as well. But anyway, so I went on the pill thinking, because, we don't want to have a pregnancy. Little did I know that you're only actually fertile, 48 to 72 hours. So let's just put me on the pill for the whole of the month. Anyway.
I get it.
So went off the pill thinking, I'll just come off the pill, and the next month we're going to Fiji on a holiday. Next month I'll come back pregnant. All will be well with the world.
Fair assumption. I think that's a fair assumption, because I think as women we live with this chronic fear of falling pregnant, when we don't want to be falling pregnant, and we just assume, why wouldn't we, that, oh Lordy, if you're not on the pill or doing something, man, you're going to be popping out those babies. So why wouldn't you think that? Fair enough. Yeah.
Exactly. And so we've been telling our subconscious all those years, I don't want a baby, I don't want a baby, I don't want a baby. And then when we've gone, okay, I'm ready for a baby now, things can go awry. So there's something, I think, energetically, that women need to consider about that part of their fertility, but that's a whole other conversation. Anyway, so my period didn't come back, and it was probably about 9 months into things. So I went to my GP, and he said, "Oh, yeah, no, that's not normal. I'll refer you to an endocrinologist." So I had some further testing, and basically in my first meeting with her she told me, "Sorry, you've got early menopause, and the only way that you'll ever become a mum is through egg donation."
What was that like to hear?
Kind of put me in a bit of a tailspin at 32 years of age, thinking that you would have no issues with becoming a mother when you had no menstrual issues before.
Yeah.
And so it took, that was in early 2007.
Yep.
So it took probably 3 years for me to come to terms with the fact that I wasn't going to have biological children, and that to become a mum I would need some help. So in those 3 years I did, a lot of you know, integrative doctors and acupuncturists and herbalists and naturopaths and, you know, every healing modality that you could think of. But my ovaries didn't wake up. So, so it took a while, and I tried all the things, and I know a few different things now that I just didn't know back then.
You don't know what you don't know, do you? I mean,
yeah, exactly. So, you know, you live and learn, and that's why I like to tell my story, because then I'm hoping that other women can try it from a different angle that I didn't try back then. And, you know, and in the hope that they can reverse their diagnosis. But anyway, so I was really fortunate in 2010 that we had the opportunity to receive eggs from an anonymous egg donor through a particular clinic in Perth. And we tried that. We had 4 eggs, 3 fertilised, but only one made it to day 3, and they implanted that, but sadly I miscarried that at 6 weeks.
Oh gosh.
So then we were back to the drawing board.
Yeah. So this was with your partner's sperm and the egg donor. Yes.
And it's, you know, it's a long wait list for the eggs. Yeah. And this particular clinic did egg sharing, so I think you know, there was a number of eggs that were shared amongst a number of women, which is great in one sense, but in the other sense, it doesn't give you a lot of chances. So we were back to the drawing board, and the next step was we were looking at South Africa. So a lot of women from Perth go to South Africa for egg donors because, you know, they don't get paid a lot of money or anything for it. I think it's equivalent to 700 Australian, or it was back then.
Wow.
So it's mostly, you know, altruistic women that are doing it.
Yep.
But it's a big expense. It's a really big expense to go. And, you know, you know, as I knew, you go and have your transfer, and then if that doesn't work, you've got to go all the way back there again. So anyway, we were at the point of using an agency to choose a donor, and we'd, you know, chosen a clinic and everything. And I was in an online support group here in Australia, and they were fantastic. They've closed now, which is sad. There is another forum that's similar that's up and running, but it was called Aussie Egg Donors at the time. And I met, so it has both donors and recipients in that group, and you could advertise in there. And I wasn't successful finding someone through there, but it gave me a lot of courage to post in some public forums. So I advertised on Essential Baby and BubHub. I don't even know if they're still going.
I think Essential Baby is.
They're still running?
Yeah, I don't know.
So that was a bit scary because it's very public, whereas the other forum it was just, you know, it was a private members only sort of thing. But anyway, a lovely lady answered my ad, and she was relatively close by to where we lived, and she was a midwife, and she worked in a hospital where it was lower socioeconomic, and so there was a lot of women that would come in for, you know, a number of their children. And this particular birth she attended, this lady was having her 10th baby, and it was going to be the 10th baby that was going to be taken away from her and put into child services. So she was just really frustrated at the situation that these, you know, women sadly were having all of these babies, and there was a lot of women out there as well that were having a lot of heartbreaking situations with not able to conceive or stillbirth, things like that. So for some reason my ad came across her radar, and she hadn't looked at donating before, but so she donated. So wow.
And so
that was the beginning of it. That was in 2010.
And
2011.
2011, and obviously that was a successful pregnancy.
So we had on our first transfer, I had 2 embryos transferred, which my Ari at the time wasn't too happy with that, but he would do anything for me. He was so lovely. Anyway, I was pregnant, and I was like, oh, okay, we might be having twins. And sadly, I started bleeding, and when they looked at the numbers of the HCG, they thought that I had lost one embryo, and it looked like the other one was hanging in there. And then we went for the heartbeat scan, and we realised that there was no heartbeat. So I had a miscarriage. It was 8 weeks at the time.
Wow.
So we lost that. So then we were back to the drawing board, and so as that was kind of the third embryo that I'd lost, my functional doctor looked at things a bit deeper and realised that because I had adrenal fatigue, that any progesterone that was being supplemented, which because you're on progesterone pessaries, that it was just being converted into cortisol. So there was no progesterone left to actually maintain the pregnancy. And the reason why a lot of women miscarry is because they are so low in progesterone.
Do you know what causes that? What?
Adrenal fatigue.
Adrenal fatigue, yeah,
it's
right.
basically 21st century stress.
Yep, absolutely, yeah.
So with the extra... I was put on cortisone, so steroids, to stop that progesterone wastage.
Right.
But I ended up being on really high doses of progesterone. The usual dose during after a transfer is about 400 milligrams a day. I was on 1,200 milligrams a day.
So like triple.
So it was high, and it was very expensive. It was like $30 a day worth of pessaries,
Wow.
It was crazy, the expense that we went through. But anyway, it's what kept Zoe. So Zoe was born in May 2012.
Yep.
And then a couple of years down the track, I was like, well, we've got a couple of embryos left. Let's give it another go.
Yep.
Sadly, one didn't take it all, and the other one was a chemical pregnancy.
What's that? What's a chemical pregnancy?
So it's when your body's indicated that there is a successful pregnancy, in that there is a HCG reading, but it's not actually, the embryo hasn't implanted, it hasn't taken, so it didn't work.
Can you,
and then
sorry to interrupt. The HCG, can you talk, just for anyone who's listening and doesn't really know, what is that and why is that important? Would you mind talking a bit through?
That's what I can't remember the long scientific name of what HCG stands for, sorry, but
that's okay.
It's basically the chemical that's given off by the embryo to say that it's starting to grow. So they call it a beta test or beta reading, and that HCG needs to basically double every day for a certain period.
Right.
And that's when you realise that the embryo is starting to grow, getting stronger and implanting.
So that's you can see that in a blood test and a urine test. I believe that's
a test.
Yeah. Blood test. Yeah. Right. And that needs to be like increasing quite dramatically, as you said, every day. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay.
So then we're back to the drawing board and asked our donor to do another cycle if she would.
Yes.
And thankfully she said yes. And so, that's when we started trying for number 2.
And that was eventually successful, number 2.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So we had, there were some issues there with getting things going. I was having some lining issues, and the first embryo that we tried didn't take it all, and it was just so unusual because I was fine with falling pregnant, was keeping the pregnancies. So we did I think it was called a hysteroscopy, which is to actually see if there's anything going on with the uterus, see if there's any fibroids or anything like that, which would be unusual because there was kind of nothing happening in my uterus, but in my ovaries. But anyway, I did some exploratory services, and they do what's called an endometrial scratch, which is they scratch the endometrial lining to activate kind of a healing process, and that can make implantation a bit better. So I had a scratch, and then we had another transfer, and that's when I did fall pregnant with Levi. And I was doing, because I knew what the progesterone issues were, I then moved from pessaries. I'd done some research, and in South Africa and America they all use progesterone in oil. So it's an intramuscular injection that you do in the sort of the upper part of your buttocks, and it's progesterone going, right into the bloodstream.
Right. Okay. And that has been found to be a bit more effective than the Pessary. And
exactly.
The Pessary, for those that don't know, it's like a dissolvable tablet, yeah?
It's like a little wax bullet. So
yes.
The progesterone is in wax, and you insert it vaginally, and it melts
absorbed,
and it's absorbed by the system, by your body.
That's really interesting, because it's reminding me as you're talking. I remember I've got a family member who, I won't say who in case she happens to be listening, but she was struggling to fall pregnant with her second in her early 40s, and IVF and whatnot. And then was basically told it's not going to work. That's it. You're too old, whatever kind of thing. She did some research online, and there was something about progesterone. That's why I'm thinking this is ringing some bells. And so she and acupuncture, and I told her about acupuncture. I said I think acupuncture is, there's research for fertility and gynecological issues can be really effective. It's not just woo woo. I'm like, I'm serious.
Absolutely.
She did that, and I'm sure she took some progesterone or got her hands on some. She's had her second baby. So, but it frustrated me that she was told, in terms of a medical standpoint, that's kind of it for you. Like, no, you can't. We have to close that. You have to close that door, and potentially she wouldn't have fallen pregnant if she hadn't, been able to do some research. And I don't know.
You have to empower yourself.
You do.
You absolutely have to empower yourself.
Yeah.
And, and fortunately in today's day and age, which is very different to when I was going through it, there's an Instagram person that has a certain situation. No doubt it's going to be exactly like you.
Yeah.
And you can kind of learn from each other. Whereas, I just didn't have that back then.
No.
But
there wasn't even that long ago. That was only a few years ago. We're not talking 20. We're talking. I mean, how old are your kids now? 8 and 4.
Things have really changed so quickly.
Yes.
So quickly. But definitely my advice to anyone listening is to go with your gut instinct and don't take what one doctor, 2 doctors, 3 doctors have said.
Yep.
Go and do your own research.
Yeah. Like you said, I think that's much more empowering too. I guess it's a tricky kind of balance, I imagine, having not gone through that experience, fortunately, of when do you concede defeat, shall I say? Like, when do you, be willing to, go through that grief process, or do you keep going? I mean, how? Because I imagine emotionally, financially, physically, on the relationship, it must be a huge toll. Potentially. Yeah.
It is huge, and there's not a lot of infrastructure around. I think the grief side of things and the trauma that goes with, a cycle not working, or miscarriage, or any heartbreaking situation along that journey. You've got your mandatory counselling at the beginning of the process, especially with egg or sperm donation, because everyone involved has to be on board and understand there's a whole host of situations that you have to discuss. And my egg donor's husband had to be involved in that counselling as well.
Yep.
And she obviously spoke to her children, who were young at the time, but let them know what was going on as well. And so you have like your mandatory 3-month cooling off period. You have another counselling session to wrap that cooling period off, make sure everyone's happy, any questions, and then you can start the cycle.
Is that a counselling session with everyone in the room?
So
or separate?
You have a separate separate session,
right.
And then at the end you have one all together, and make sure everyone's happy. But that's kind of it, and it's all very much relatively textbook, but it doesn't really deal with the emotional aspect, I guess, for the recipient, and also the egg donor as well. So I definitely think that's it's an area that may have changed a bit now. I mean, I've been out of it for nearly 4.5, 5 years, I suppose. But back then, the clinic didn't really offer anything else, and I can remember, you know, one or two sort of specialised counsellors for IVF, but, you know, egg donation is just such a unique situation as well.
Yep.
I think most of my support, and still to this day, I've made some really good friends out of that online forum that I was in that are actually Perth-based, and, you know, we still have great friendships and our kids play together, and, you know, we kind of just, you know, talk to each other about things. But yeah, there's a whole grief trauma process. And even to this day, you know, I'm still, you know, I'm thrilled when I hear about someone's pregnancy, but you still get that little sting.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. It must never
even after all these years
go away. Yeah.
It just doesn't, and I don't know whether it ever will, and you have to kind of make peace with that too.
That's it. I think that's the thing with grief. It's once you enter that world of grief, that object, I'm just going to call it that because I can't think of anything else to say, it's there forever. It's now part of you. It's like you've grown something new, and you have to kind of then shape your life around it in a way, and you can't ignore it. You have to honor it. It's like another little, it's kind of like you've given birth to something, quite weirdly, and you have to otherwise that will eat you alive, I think, and then potentially infect the new stuff that you have going on. You know, it's difficult though. I imagine that's just an ongoing pain, like you said, that kind of there it is again, you know. And
you have to do the work. You have to do the work. It's not something that is just going to go away overnight, and you have to either, you know, whatever that is for you, whether it's you know, exercise or hobby or meditation or you know, a modality that helps you just to release any stuck emotions and just process as things come up. And it'll always come up, but it's just that you've got to acknowledge it, love it, and let it go. Touch it and let it go.
That's interesting, the concept of trauma, you know, through the process of, I've certainly heard of the roller coaster of emotions and the costs in all areas of life, but those kind of, it's like these ongoing, it sounds like these kind of ongoing traumas that you experience, you know, that I imagine can be cumulative, you know. And
absolutely, from that first diagnosis to whatever the situation is. For me, it was obviously being told that, you know, I couldn't have my own biological children, to, you know, going through finding a donor, and you know, and a lot of women go through a number of donors, and you know, there's trauma attached to each and every one of those situations, and then you go through pregnancy and birth, and depending on what type of birth you have, and then breastfeeding issues, and then obviously you've got your own family and relationship stuff that's all chucked in the mix as well. Work situations.
How do you juggle?
It's a lot we have to navigate.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I'm curious about, was it in terms of, say, your relationship, did that put pressure on things or stress, or how did you guys navigate that, as you were saying, that term, navigate? It is navigation, I think.
It's a huge amount of financial stress. And in the beginning, when you're just double income, no kids, it's manageable. Okay, you're not going on holidays, you're not doing all the things necessarily, you're not having any savings, you're not paying off the mortgage necessarily as much as you want to, but you know, you can handle it. And then you're both united in the fact that, you know, you want to be parents and you'll do anything to have this much wanted child. And then sort of the reality of raising a child and putting them through school, and then if you want number two, and then you have to go through that whole process again, which is again expensive. It's been a financial stress on us. And I'm not going to lie, our relationship has had some rocky roads, but you know, where we work through it every day, we just do the best we can, and
that's it.
And we're a united force through it, and for our kids as well.
The unification, I think that you have to be a team, you know, no matter what comes at you as a couple. But I imagine under some conditions like that, would we say that life kind of challenge that involves both of you. And I was curious too, Vicky, about the process for you and maybe your partner as well, like of realizing that will give birth and this is your child, that biologically, you know, speaking, what is that like to kind of, I don't know, where does that sit in your head? Was that really difficult, or is it?
It's in the early days when you've just got this precious baby. You're wondering how you're going to navigate it all. So it's really not until until they're getting older and you're having lots of different conversations with people. You know, some might say, oh, you know, gee, she didn't get any of you, because like they do look exactly like my husband. And in the beginning it was just like, do I tell this person the whole story, or do I just like, oh yeah, just pass, you know, just ignore it. But then every now and again, depending on who they are, then I'll say, yeah, well, you know, they were conceived through egg donation. I wasn't able to have my biological children. So it just depends on who they are. Right. If I'm going to have that sort of conversation with them to make them aware, or whether I'm just going to let it go. And so it's just kind of a case-by-case basis. But I'm more than happy to own the fact that, no, they're not my biological children. They know they're not, and that's fine. And I think that, you know, in a way, I'm respecting, you know, the wonderful woman that is my egg donor as well, by making her a part of the conversation, because I think there is a lot of people out there that choose not to tell their children, and that's their choice. But I felt for me that I wanted to really, you know, honour her in that way, and just make sure that the kids were aware that that they've, you know, a result of this amazing woman that, you know, didn't have to do this, was, you know, totally off, you know, not paid for. And, you know, there's a lot of time that goes into it, you know.
Oh, sure.
All the blood tests, and then obviously having the fertility treatments and the egg pickup and the recovery from egg pickup, because that can be really brutal.
Oh, really?
It's a lot of, there can be a lot of pain associated after that, with, you know, lots of cramping, and sometimes there's the risk of, you know, hyperstimulation of the ovaries, and that adds another complication. So it's a big process. And her view was always of, well, it's just, you know, it's just a bunch of cells, it's just like giving blood. But there's actually a lot of physical aspect and time that goes into it as well.
What do you say to your children? When did you start having a conversation
There's
with
some
them?
wonderful books.
Yes.
So actually my egg donor gave me a beautiful book to read to Zoe.
Yes.
And I haven't read a book to Levi, because it's always kind of been, I guess, part of the conversation when it comes up anyway, so he knows anyway. But I want to get more of a boy one, I guess, for him. But it's a pretty little the book that I've got would suit Levi as well. But it's this story of two bunnies, and one bunny couldn't have children, so another bunny gave her seeds, and they put these so the boys bunny seeds were put with the other bunny seeds, and they put it in the other bunny's tummy. And it's just a beautiful story. And it was, I'm not going to lie, reading that story to her for the first time, because I think she was about 2 when I read that to her, because there's a certain level of understanding. And oh man, I bawled afterwards. Like it was such a huge I guess closure as well, that I've told you, like the words are out there. And every now and again she'll bring it up, and it's just, I think it's just they won't remember when they were told, and that's what I wanted. It will just always be part of their knowledge.
Very
and
normal.
And I think, and they know some of the other kids that we hang out with that have been conceived the same way. So they'll just have that familiarity with them as well. But and they're all aware as well of their situation. So you know, it's great to not have to feel like you're keeping a secret, and that you're keeping a secret from your children or other children as well. It's all out in the open, which is it's just a better way to live life.
I imagine that would potentially be a bit of a burden, but I suppose, like you were saying, it's up to every individual and every family. You know, that's a choice that they make. But it sounds like a kind of a relief for you once you kind of broke the news, so to speak, through the bunny story. That is so beautiful. Kind of.
Yeah, there are some beautiful books, really beautiful books.
Did they? And have they met her? Have they met the egg donor?
Yes, yes, they have.
Yeah.
And she doesn't live close by now, but we were actually due to have a catch up just before COVID, so we've got to get that catch up back on the books. But yeah, they had a wonderful time spending some time with her, and no doubt, you know, she enjoyed seeing them too.
Yeah.
But we're on Facebook together, so it's kind of, you know, we see what's happening in each other's lives anyway. Yeah.
That's it sounds so beautiful. Like there's these great little connections and kind of honouring of the process and the people involved, and you know, it's all sort of out in the open. You know, it's not a big secret. And like you said, you know, if somebody sort of makes a comment about the physical appearance of your children, it's just a kind of do I tell this person? Do I not? But I think that's interesting in itself, that you don't really know who's going to say what or not, and then do you say anything or not? You know, I imagine does it catch you off guard sometimes, or are you kind of used to it?
I'm a bit more used to it now, but in the beginning, it was a little tricky to navigate, but I mean, Zoe's 8 now, so it's been going on for a while. So now it's fine, and she knows, so she doesn't necessarily say anything, but if I say something and it's said with you know, any shame around it, you know, so it doesn't make her feel less than, you know. I think that's the most important part, is making her feel like she's, you know, it's there's nothing to be shameful of the process.
Yeah. I suppose too, I mean, I don't know, but in what are we now, 2020, there is so much variety in a family, and importantly, I think we have really expanded that. A family is however you define a family, you know, and however you've come to be, whether that's, you know, same-sex parents, or conception through egg donation, or sperm donation, or adoption, or single parent, whatever. You know, there is just, it's so big now, as it should be, because I think throughout history it's probably been like that, except for egg donation, obviously, that, you know, probably wasn't around a couple of hundred years ago or 1,000 years ago. But so that people don't, I guess what am I trying to say, don't feel like it still has to be this very narrowly defined definition of a family.
Absolutely. And I think also with blended families now that you know, new partners, if they, you know, whether they've been with the children from a young age or even older, if they are more of the active parent, or even, you know, if the other parent is still quite active in the relationship, they're still seen as an important part of that parenting circle.
Absolutely. It's whatever you make it, I suppose.
Absolutely.
What am I going to ask now? Like, what, I guess, in terms of what helped you the most during the struggle to, I'm going to use the word struggle, you know, maybe you have
it was a struggle.
You mentioned like the online support groups being really, really key. And I assume your partner as well. Is there any other things that you did, or, you know, that were particularly useful or not useful? Like what?
I think definitely the online support group was probably the biggest thing that got me through it. And, you know, and all those women, and even, you know, there's some donors that I became really good friends with, you know, that are sort of over east, but we're still friends on Facebook and Instagram, and they're just such special people in my life, because we had such a great relationship and network of support, no matter whether it was someone donating or you know, someone being a recipient. It was we were just there for every cycle and every hurdle that they came across every loss. You know, there was even cancer journeys in there amongst all of that. So we were just a really strong network of women at that time. So that was probably the thing that really got me through, because they all understood. You know, day to day in my own life, I think it was being focused on the end goal, really. You know, it was trying to do whatever self-care that I could do, whether that was, you know, having a massage or having acupuncture or exercise, meditation, just trying to get out of my own head, I guess. And I had worked full time as well. So that was, you know, that's one way to distract yourself with busy jobs. But yeah, I think the key component is, you know, if anyone listening is going through something similar, don't be shut off to the support of other women. Yeah.
I just love hearing that. You know, I guess it's kind of the point of this podcast. The podcast is for absolutely anyone to listen to, you know, whatever, kind of great, awesome. But the uniqueness really of women and our journeys and our struggles and our bodies, excuse me, that only women really can understand. You can only truly understand that. Like, I can't directly understand your experience, but there are other women out there, like you said, who do, and there's such power in that. You just have to, I think, connect with those women, and there's something almost spiritual, I think, and primal about that for women coming together. That's very empowering in itself, you know. That's what I'm hearing.
Absolutely. It comes back to that, you know, creating your own village. And, you know, it takes a village to raise a child. I mean, it's so true. And it takes a village sometimes for a woman to get pregnant these days.
Yeah.
So,
and
I think that, you know, there's no, there shouldn't be any shame involved with any infertility challenge. And, you know, I think that there's still, unfortunately, a lot around that. But I think with, like, great podcasts like this and more conversations happening, that this is just the way that it is in our society. And I think we just need to have really frank and open conversations and make it okay to talk about. And, you know, and in particular, you know, to talk about our menstrual cycles as well, and to talk about that with our children as well. And I just think there needs to be more conversations without any awkwardness and shame, because it's just a physical process. Like, there shouldn't be that shame that's been around that for so long. And I think better conversations also about pregnancy and conception and that's a whole other conversation as well.
It is. The shame thing, I think shame is very silencing, you know, and discourages conversations when we're still embedded in shame. It promotes secrecy, really, you know, and it's very disempowering, I suppose, as well.
It is.
I'm curious, like, what's your thoughts on why, particularly around infertility, that there is shame around that for women? What do you think that's about?
Well, I think because it's not until you're actually faced with an infertility struggle that you actually realise that there is actually a lot of people struggling with fertility, and you're educated in the fact that it is so easy to fall pregnant, and you know, you've got to be on birth control, or, you know, you've got to be careful, blah, blah, blah. So then you think that it's just going to be an easy process to become a mother when you want to become one. And when you can't, you feel that there's something wrong with you. What did I do in this lifetime, or past life, or, you know, and I just think that that's when a lot of the secrecy comes about, because women don't necessarily want to share to the world that they've had to have their children in a different way to perhaps members of their family or friends who, you know, you quite often hear that comment, I just have to look at my husband and I fall pregnant. You know, there's still a lot of those conversations happening. And when you're struggling with fertility, you don't feel like you can have a conversation with those people, because they're not going to understand what you're going through. So then that's when the silence is is kept, and which is really sad because you have to deal with those emotions at some stage. It is going to come up and bite you on the bum. So
yeah, yes, it is.
Yeah. You got to let go of that shame, and there's nothing to feel shameful about. And I think it's, you know, the conversation is a lot better these days in the fact that, especially on Instagram, there's a lot of people that are vocal about their trying to conceive journey. So that's fantastic. But there's still a lot of work to be done. And
what I kind of heard a bit there as you were talking was like the concept of blame and blaming yourself when you said, you know, kind of start to question what I'd done in this life or last life or my past life or whatever, you know, whatever one chooses to believe. But I'm like, ooh, interesting and painful and kind of is punishing. There was I kind of thought, wow, you know, but that makes sense to me that you would question absolutely everything. What did you go through that? I guess why me? What's this about? What have I done wrong? Or should I not have been on the pill? Like I would have kind of gone there. I imagine I probably would have felt pretty pissed off to be honest. Yeah. What did you go through that? I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I think because, as I said before, I had a beautiful period. So if I had not been on the pill, I would have, if anything was starting to go awry, my body would have been able to tell me. If I had skipped a period, or if I had to become more painful, or I was starting to clot, or whatever the case may be, I'd be like, okay, well, this needs to be investigated.
Yeah.
And I did have a little bit of a warning sign. I remember going off the pill for a break. You know, there's that thing when you're on the pill, you should have a break. It doesn't really help you that much having a break. But anyway, I went off the pill just before we were due to get married. So I was about 25. So I'd been on the pill for about 5 years or so.
Yep.
And it was about 3 months. My period didn't come back. So I went to my GP and he's like, oh, yeah, no, that's totally normal. Just go back on the pill. Little did I, and you'll get your period back. Little did I know that, well, it's not actually a period. It's just a bleed.
Yep.
But no, it isn't normal. And, you know, your period should have returned sooner than that. And at that point, if I had been referred to someone else, maybe some things could have been done. But I've dived a lot deeper now on ovarian failure, and I still think, you know, if I hadn't have come across the right practitioner, I still probably wouldn't have gotten to the bottom of it. But hey, maybe my levels were at a certain point where I could still have had IVF, because there are women that are faced with, you know, creeping up FSH, which is your follicular stimulating hormone. So that's the message from your brain to your ovaries to produce an egg. So when it's really high, that means that your body is not responding. Your brain's telling your body to do the work, and the body's like, no, not doing it. So my FSH, when I was first diagnosed, was 67. So that's when they, you know, the IVF doctors look at it and go, yep, there's no way that you're going to respond to medication. Wow. But who knows, back then maybe it would have been lower, and there would have been some chance to, you know, do something with my eggs, or they could have, you know, seen what was going on with my ovaries. But yeah, so there was a little bit of a warning sign there.
How do you how do I say this? Like, how did you process that? Like, looking back, that there was potentially a window of opportunity, but it wasn't picked up by the doctor, and you didn't know better. Why would you know? Why would you? Of course. Like, yeah.
It's hard. It's a process. It goes along with that grief, and I don't know. I mean, I obviously come to terms with it a lot better now, but yeah, for a long time, like I couldn't even talk about the conversation that doctor had at that time, telling me that I had early menopause. Like, I couldn't even talk to anyone without bursting into tears. But I've done a lot of work through a particular technique, a neurological technique to try and release that trauma. But yeah, I look back at that situation and I think, but the journey that I'm on now and what I've been doing in the past few years has meant that hopefully other women can learn from what I've gone through, and maybe they will question those doctors, and they will listen to their bodies a bit differently. And so hopefully they don't have to face what I went through. But there's messages out of every mess. So, and that's where I'm at now.
Yeah. I mean, I guess on that note, what have you learned about yourself through this whole journey? Like, how would you put words to that? Have you learned stuff about yourself, you know?
I think it's more of not so much on an emotional level, but more on a physical and environmental level. Like really how important it is for us to look after ourselves with our health, what we're putting in us, what we're putting on us, people that we're hanging around, you know, our mindset and stressful jobs and, you know, that whole those, you know, individual situations. You've got to really assess it. And I think this year in particular has made us realize that even more. You know, we've just got to look after ourselves and put ourselves first. And I think that we tend to not do that as women in general, but and in this day and age we're sort of last on the list. But I think that's probably the biggest takeaway is the more the physical and environmental aspect of how we're living our life. And that's what I'm imposing on, you know, my kids and my family, so that, you know, my children hopefully don't have to, you know, face any fertility issues. And, you know, early puberty is such a prolific thing at the moment. You know, I'm really mindful of that with Zoe. And, so I just, I think it's education really, because until we come across someone that's been through my situation, you wouldn't know that is even a possibility. And that, you know, someone could have ovarian failure if it, you know, unless they were born without ovaries or some other gynecological issue. But so that's what I try and do, is just be open about the journey and hope that it helps.
It sounds like really encourage taking hold of your health and your body. I think that, you know, that's such a huge topic in itself, particularly for women. I think we're in such an interesting time in history where for women, you know, that I say this a lot, and I believe this a lot, that, you know, and I'm genuinely grateful to be alive right now and to have the choices and options, and including being on the pill and all these kinds of things. And yet, personally for me, I haven't been on the pill for many years, because I'm like, I feel like we're like guinea pigs in that sense. And that's very hard, you know, because I'm very grateful, because I think it has freed up women enormously from the burden, quite frankly, of unwanted pregnancies after pregnancy after pregnancy and all that stuff, and not being able to educate ourselves and all that kinds of stuff. On the other hand, what is happening to our bodies, like you've said so beautifully, you know, that was perhaps masking something underneath, and that I wrote this here: periods are our dashboards. Is that what you said?
Yes.
Yeah, and I'm right. Like, oh my God, that is just brilliant, you know, kind of thing. But we never talk about that. Rarely. I think there's much more of that conversation now. But I really like even, you know, that there's like period. If we're talking about period undies and like a menstrual cup, which I've just bought. I haven't used it yet, because that to me is. And I think for a lot of women, it's like, oh, that's a bit gross. But I'm like, that's you, that's your body, that's your process. We actually need to see and feel that, to be honest.
Absolutely. There's a lot of energy that comes with that as well. And if we're not letting that flow.
Yes, literally
then
flow.
That has its own ramifications. And I used toxic, you know, laden tampons for years. And you know, knowing what I know now, there's no way on this earth, you know, I'm going to be letting Zoe do anything like that to her body. But, you know, there are a lot of people that still do it because they aren't aware. Sure. And they haven't been involved in those conversations. But, you know, it's great that the cups and the undies and all of those things are now becoming more common, so that, you know, women have a choice to do that. But even, you know, sanitary pads, you know, it's toxic cotton and it's right there in your delicate parts. You know, our body absorbs everything that it touches. So so that's great. I'm glad that you brought that up, because and as I said, there's a lot with that energy, that feminine energy of, you know, stopping that blood flow, stopping that energy.
And how damaging that can be, you know. But I think it's like I picked mine up at Woolies, so I'm like, look at that, mainstream. Like, I was like,
go Woolies.
I know, I was really impressed actually with a big, you know, conglomerate supermarket chain. I was like, oh well, you know, some points there. Kudos to you, whoever made that decision. I don't know if it's in every Woolies, but there's a really good, I haven't listened to her yet, but there's a good podcast by Lucy Peach. She's based in Perth. I think she's a musician, but she's also very much about women. And I think her podcast is all about periods. I think she talks all about periods and empowerment and stuff like that. I'm really not articulating that well, but there's absolutely podcasts and women out there doing all that kinds of stuff. And like not a side hustle for me, but as a side interest, I suppose, I'm kind of sit in some of that weird like yoni empowerment kind of stuff, because as I've gotten older, I'm in my mid-40s too, I'm just like, what is this shit going on? Like, wait a second, you know, like, because I think too, because our biology is hidden, you know, so we cannot help that. We're born with that. And like, you wouldn't know if you're having any kind of, like you said, ovary problems, or what, if you've been born with ovaries, is just this assumption. And until something goes wrong, potentially, you know, later in your life, and if we're shoving things up there because we're like, ew, I don't want to see that, or somebody else finds it gross, how on earth are we supposed to know? And I'm like, this just contributes to women being suppressed, you know, that's my little theory. Absolutely. But I'm like, this is not cool. This is not cool at all. And we need to be talking about it. And I think
with, you know, the other, like with the pill and IUDs and all those sorts of things, it should come along with information about it's basically a female form of castration, which in turn upsets our gut health as well, and deprives our body of a lot of essential vitamins and minerals. And so I think there just needs to be a conversation of, okay, if you go on this sort of medication, well, this is the types of things that you need to supplement, or this is the types of, you know, dietary areas that you really need to focus on, because that medication is going to deplete your body of those essential things for you to have a healthy body. So there just needs to be other conversations. And, you know, having said that, the type of pill that I was on, a number of women that were going through the journey at the same time as me, we were on the same brand of pill. So whether there's anything in that,
I know.
So women just need to empower themselves.
That's it, at the end of the day.
What are you doing for the sake of convenience that could have long-term effects, whether that's having children or other, you know, health implications that could arise. So I think there just needs to be a bit of a conversation around that. And also with respecting our cycles, and seeing it as a dashboard, but also what is our body going through every month? And what exactly do I need to do to nourish and protect that sacred time, really? There's lots of, you know, things with certain foods at certain times of your cycle, and certain activities and certain social aspects. You know, it's really getting in tune with that, like, you know, the way that the moon cycles are. So I think kind
of lost that.
We've lost touch with a lot of that. So I think that that's something for women to consider as well, is the cycles of the period is to be valued. I would value mine if I had them.
I know. Yeah. Like you were saying, I think the convenience factor, and I don't know, that's fraught, because we live in an age of I don't know, convenience and shortcuts and rush, and in a way that's really great, but in another way it's not. And it's great in that we have the internet. We can talk to other women. I'm like, there is so much potential now, and there are a lot of conversations and awareness, but at the same time there's still a lot of the convenience or the I still don't want to go there, or it's just not the way it's done, or my partner thinks this is gross or something like that, and you're like, well, you need to
and the Band-Aid approaches as well.
Band-Aid approach,
sort of
yes.
Just came back around to that, your period is your dashboard, and
yes,
if the doctor says, well, let's just put you on the pill, well, that's not getting to the root cause of what's going on. It's just going to mask and hide. So
I think in that notion with doctors, doctors are, in many ways are fantastic, and I'm so grateful for
absolutely
medicine and all that stuff. However, they're not just like you were saying, get a second opinion, a third opinion, a fourth opinion, and not necessarily from the medical profession. That's what they're trained in. They're trained to look at the body, and that great, awesome, thank you. Yes, have a look because there's something going wrong. But is there other? What about my mind? What about my spirit or my energy? Or like that's so because I think, like you said, you listen to yourself. I think I think when somebody says to you, I'll just go on this, and you have this little this is subtle, it's there. If it's not going to work for you, something will go off in your body. But often we're like, we don't listen to it, and I think there's many thousands of reasons for that. But you just kind of sit with that, I think, and wherever that leads you.
Absolutely. And if you go on something, for example, I went on synthetic hormones when I was first diagnosed, basically HRT.
Oh, yes, yeah.
But I'm like, that doesn't really sit well with me as a relatively young woman, and all of the health implications that we're aware of about HRT. And, that caused me to look for other alternatives. And thankfully, I found out about, bioidentical hormones and things like that. So, if something's not sitting with you, then, you definitely shouldn't feel any shame in speaking up and being your own advocate.
Yeah. I think that's such a key point. And I think if you struggle to do that, maybe take someone along with you who can, even if they say nothing, but they're physically there and they can just kind of support you. Or if you have little notes for yourself just to kind of go, no, this is the questions I want to ask, or anything like that, because it can be daunting, I think, to
absolutely
go in and confront a medical professional. Not confront, but it can feel confronting as all hell when you're like, I'm not so sure if I should do that, and they're like, oh, come on, and then they're like, well, I'm not going to help you then. So sometimes that happens. Well, if you don't do this, then I can't help you, and see you later. And you're like backed into a corner.
Yes, that's right. And a lot of people don't feel like then they can find another practitioner, but you should, because at the end of the day, you're the client.
Absolutely.
You're paying for a service.
Yes.
So if you're not happy with it, go somewhere else.
Yeah.
So you find, and there are loads of great practitioners out there that really are, taking the time to sort of delve into some root causes. But there's a lot of practitioners that, gosh, they have to see so many people. You come in with a problem, a solution is to give you a script, and sure. They think that's how they're trained. That's what they're trained to do. So I think for us to expect any more from them is somewhat unrealistic and unfair. And I think that we just need to take it.
Good point.
That power back ourselves.
Yeah. Like you said, did you say you saw is it an integrative doctor? Is that what you mentioned?
Yeah.
So what is an integrative doctor for those who might be interested?
Yeah, so they will look at other ways of testing, not just in, blood serum, but also they'll do a saliva test or a hair mineral analysis just to try and get an idea of what exactly is going on in the body and what pathways perhaps skipping a beat. And then they will look at whether it's, a specific pill that's made up with essential minerals or vitamins based on what your body needs. there's other functional doctors, integrated doctors that will do hypnotherapy or other modalities like that as part of the healing process. So it's just a bit more in-depth, investigative, and looking at, supplements alongside even, a prescription. It's just a bit more of a whole body focus.
So that is still a medical doctor, like a GP, but they've had other training. They've just a voluntarily special training that they've wanted to go and do. Like with any doctor, you go and kind of specialise, or you have your interests, kind of thing. And they do exist. They are around, by the sounds of it.
Absolutely. We've got some really good ones in Perth too. So there's lots of avenues out there. But now with the internet the way that it is, which wasn't necessarily when I was on this journey, but now everyone does Skype consults, and you can get saliva tests sent to you, and you can do your own hair and mineral analysis, and go and get your blood test from your GP, and they can review the results, and poo tests and wee tests and all those things. So it doesn't really matter. Like if you connect with a practitioner anywhere around the world, they'll generally look after you.
Yeah. Connection. I think that's a very good point. That shows up in therapy, like in counselling. You have to have a good connection with your therapist, otherwise it's not going to work. But exactly the same with your medical professional. You have to feel like they kind of get you, they respect you. They're not going to, ignore you or shove their whatever down your throat kind of thing. You have to feel like, and that can be hard. I think that is so hard to find a good GP who you're like, they're listening to me. They're listening to me. That's all we want.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Vicky, we're at an hour. We've been talking for an hour. Yay.
Great.
Thank you so much. I know we've kind of deviated off, but I think that's all part of it. I think that's really important, the things we've ended up talking about in terms of women's bodies, really, and women's voices in relation to fertility and periods and all of that kind of stuff, as well as where we started with your journey and where you've ended up with two beautiful children. I'm so so honoured to have you talk about that, and I'm so relieved it turned out well for you, and you're a mum of two kids. I mean, that's a miracle. That's wonderful.
Yes. Very lucky.
Thank you so much, Vicky.
Pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.
You're welcome. All right. Okay. Stopped recording. You've been listening to The Hidden World of Women, the podcast brought to you by Women's Health and Wellbeing Services. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram and YouTube by looking up Women's Health and Wellbeing Services. You can also find us at our website www.whws.org.au. Bye.